No one in that room could have imagined what was about to happen. In just a few minutes, a 10-year-old girl, with no credentials, no prestigious school behind her, and no academic mentor, would dismantle a theory NASA had declared unsolvable for decades. Not with supercomputers, not with complex equations, but with a box of Lego and a pack of colored pencils. What unfolded that day didn't just shake the scientific world, it exposed a truth buried for 40 years. Brilliance doesn't ask for permission. No one noticed Naomi Carter at first, not because she tried to hide, but because no one expected a 10-year-old black girl to be standing quietly at the back of a restricted conference room inside a federal research facility. The room was filled with senior engineers, physicists, and policy advisors, people whose conversations shaped budgets, research grants, and the future of American space technology. Their voices overlapped in clipped sentences and acronyms. Naomi listened, hands folded, eyes steady, absorbing words she did not yet have names for. The meeting stopped the moment a security officer saw her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply paused the discussion with a lifted hand and said, "We have a problem." Chairs turned. Heads followed his gaze. Confusion flickered, then irritation. Someone laughed under their breath. Another person checked a phone, already disengaging. Children were not part of the agenda. "Sweetheart," the officer said, soft but firm, "you can't be in here." Naomi nodded once. She had expected this. She had practiced what to say, practiced keeping her voice calm the way her grandfather taught her. "I was told to bring this," she replied, holding out a single folded sheet of paper. The officer didn't take it. He glanced toward the long table where the senior staff sat, waiting for someone, anyone, to confirm that this was a mistake. No one did. The silence stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable, then snapped. "This is a closed session," a man at the far end said. His tone carried the weight of authority, the kind that came from decades of being listened to. "Who brought her in?" No one answered. Naomi felt the heat rise in her face, but she did not move. She stood exactly where she was, because she had been taught that if you were sure of your work, you didn't need to rush. Still, she could feel the room closing around her, the unspoken judgment forming in the air. She was out of place. Everyone could see it. The officer gently took her by the shoulder and guided her toward the door. As they walked, a few people smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just distracted, as if this were a small interruption before returning to real business. Someone near the window whispered, "Whose kid is that?" Another muttered something about security protocols and liability. As Naomi crossed the threshold, the paper slipped from her hand. It landed face up on the polished floor. A woman with short gray hair noticed it before anyone else did. She had not spoken during the meeting. She rarely did. Her name was Meredith Voss, and she had spent her career learning when silence was safer than truth. But when she saw the diagram on that paper, lines intersecting in a way that made her breath catch, she stood. "Wait," Meredith said. The room froze again, this time for a different reason. Meredith was not just another engineer. Her credentials were unquestionable. Her presence alone brought in funding, sponsorships, and long-term government contracts. When she spoke, people listened. She walked to the paper, bent down slowly, and picked it up. Her eyes scanned the page, once, then again, more carefully. What she saw should not have been there, not in a child's handwriting, not in colored pencil, not at all. "This model," Meredith said quietly. "Where did you get it?" Naomi turned back. For the first time, her voice trembled. "I made it." A ripple moved through the room. Skepticism, disbelief, something close to annoyance. The man at the end of the table shook his head. "That's not funny." "It's not a joke," Meredith replied. She looked at Naomi now, really looked at her. "Who helped you?" "No one," Naomi said. "I just kept fixing what didn't work." The officer cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we still need to escort her out." Meredith nodded, but she didn't take her eyes off the paper. "Of course," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "May I keep this?" Naomi hesitated, then nodded. She had copies, dozens of them, drawn on scraps of old paper, taped to walls, rewritten when they failed. This one was just the cleanest. As the door closed behind Naomi, the meeting resumed, But something had shifted. Meredith sat down slowly, the paper folded in front of her like a secret she hadn't meant to uncover. Around her, the conversation returned to budgets and timelines, to funding allocations and strategic priorities. No one noticed that she wasn't listening anymore. Her mind had gone somewhere else entirely. She remembered another room, 40 years earlier. Another meeting, another piece of work dismissed because it didn't come from the right voice, the right background, the right person. She remembered being told to wait, to refine, to be realistic. She remembered watching an idea disappear into a filing cabinet marked unviable. Meredith unfolded the paper again. The logic was crude in places, the notation informal. But the structure was sound, more than sound. It corrected an assumption that had quietly undermined an entire line of research for decades, the kind of mistake that only survived because everyone had agreed not to question it. Across the hall, Naomi sat on a bench, feet dangling above the floor. She stared at her hands, willing them to stop shaking. She told herself she hadn't failed. She had expected to be turned away. Still, it hurt in a way she hadn't prepared for. Not because they said no, but because they hadn't even asked why she was there. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. If they don't understand you, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're early. Inside the room, Meredith folded the paper once more and slipped it into her bag. For the first time in years, she felt something stir that had nothing to do with contracts or professional recognition or career advancement. It was curiosity, raw, unsettling, and dangerous. Naomi Carter had not come looking for permission. She had come with a question, and without realizing it, she had just stepped into a story that would challenge everything this institution believed about intelligence, opportunity, and who deserved access to the future of STEM education. The blueprint wasn't supposed to exist anymore, not after 3 decades of sealed archives, shredded records, and forgotten names, but it was there, faint but still visible, buried under layers of dust in the mechanical grime of a half-dead printer that hadn't worked properly since 1998. Naomi Carter found it by accident. She had just turned 10, and instead of a birthday cake, her grandfather had given her the same thing he gave every year, a rusted tool set, a small notebook with squared paper, and one entire Sunday to do anything she wanted inside his cluttered print repair shop. She called it the factory. It was hardly more than a one-car garage with peeling walls, sun-faded NASA posters, and the steady drip of an ancient faucet. But to Naomi, it was sacred ground. That afternoon, she was elbow-deep inside an old IBM laser writer, fiddling with its tray loader because she liked the clicking sound it made when the gears spun freely. She liked sounds that followed rules. Gears didn't lie. If something didn't work, you could open it, see it, fix it, unlike people. While tugging at a metal panel, she felt something catch. Not a gear or a spring, something softer. Behind the toner compartment, wedged between 2 corroded plates, a folded piece of transparency film was stuck. She slid it out carefully, thinking it was just another customer's forgotten chart. But this wasn't a chart. This was odd. It looked like a satellite map, except wrong. The grid lines weren't latitudes or longitudes. They bent at impossible angles, spiraled inward, then outward. Colored annotations curved along the edges, too neat to be hand-drawn, too irregular to be computer-generated. In one corner, half faded by time, a name was printed in tiny block letters. Meredith Voss, Till 93A D prototype. Naomi didn't know who Meredith Voss was. She didn't even know what Till meant, but something in that blueprint made her skin tingle. It felt alive. She ran to the tool bench and spread the film across her grandfather's work light, squinting to make sense of the shapes. Her eyes flicked between the spirals and the overlays. Then she did what she always did when something didn't make sense. She started copying it. It took her 3 hours to recreate the design with a Sharpie and wax paper. Then she pulled out her box of Lego bricks and began building. She built what she saw. She didn't understand what it meant, but her hands moved like they knew. She recreated the shifting lattice of the blueprint, using bricks in red, blue, and yellow to mimic the paths. She marked the anomalies with green stickers from an old label maker. Her grandfather, Thomas Carter, had been sitting in the back with his feet up, a cup of decaf steaming beside him, and a heating pad draped across his knees. He wasn't paying attention until the printer started whirring again. The old laser writer, the one that hadn't run in years, suddenly lit up, beeped twice, and pulled paper from a tray that should have been jammed. He blinked. "Naomi? What did you touch?" "Nothing. Just this." She pointed to the Lego structure, now glowing softly under the overhead light. A breeze pushed through the garage door, and something shifted in the room. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it in his chest. She looked up at him. "Pawpaw, is it weird if a shape tells you what to do?" He didn't answer right away. Thomas Carter had been many things in his lifetime. A technician, a draftsman, a maintenance engineer at Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland before his early retirement. But what he wasn't, what he had never allowed himself to be, was someone who believed in things that couldn't be explained by hardware and logic. Yet, there it was. A 10-year-old girl had just reactivated a dead printer by copying a forgotten schematic using toys and intuition. He walked over slowly, eyes on the film. And then he froze. That name. Meredith Voss. His hands shook as he picked up the transparency. He hadn't heard that name in 34 years. Back in the late 80s, before budget cuts and politics reshaped the space exploration agenda, there had been a think tank division inside NASA called TIL, Temporal Inversion Lab. Their goal wasn't to time travel, though the press had called it that, but to design satellites that could predict orbital drift by modeling time-inverted particle behavior. Meredith Voss was a postdoctoral engineer who had proposed a new mapping system for anomaly detection. Her designs were too radical for the time. Thomas remembered watching her proposal get shredded, literally, in a closed-door meeting. He leaned against the table, breath catching in his throat. "Naomi, do you have any idea what you just copied?" "Nope. I just thought it looked cool." The next day, he dug out an old desktop PC and booted up a long-forgotten diagnostics program. Naomi sat beside him, legs swinging from the bench, while he input parameters based on her recreation. When the simulation launched, they both stared. It didn't crash, it didn't glitch, it worked. A dead theory, one that had ruined Meredith's career and buried an entire lab, just mapped itself out using a 10-year-old's Lego structure. Thomas stood up too fast and nearly fell. Naomi caught him by the sleeve. "Pawpaw? What is it?" He looked down at her, voice hoarse. "You just revived a ghost, baby, a ghost they tried real hard to kill." In the weeks that followed, Naomi expanded the model. She built other versions, adding new constraints, redrawing lines with color pencils when simulations failed. She didn't just tinker, she debugged the logic with an instinct Thomas couldn't explain. At night, he'd catch her whispering to the drawings as if they were speaking back. And then, something changed. One afternoon, as she connected 2 points in the model that no one had ever thought to connect, the simulation spat out something new. A predictive pattern, a repeating sequence. Thomas stared at the numbers. His background in orbital calculations told him what he was seeing. Temporal harmonics. These were the kinds of signals that, if correct, could allow a satellite to see its own position across time, not just space. That wasn't engineering, that was history-shaping math. He stepped outside, lit a cigarette for the first time in 15 years, and stared out at the cracked sidewalk and boarded-up houses of their neighborhood. He had always told Naomi to aim low, stay safe, not ruffle feathers. But now he knew. The world wasn't ready for her, and if it ever was, it sure wouldn't welcome her gently. Inside, Naomi was already redrawing the entire model on the garage wall. She was humming. The next day, Thomas made a phone call to the only person he still trusted at NASA. It had been 30 years, but he had never deleted her number. Meredith picked up on the second ring. "Voss. It's Carter. You remember Till 93A? A pause. A long one. "I do." "Well, my granddaughter just fixed it." "What do you mean, fixed it?" She found your model in a broken printer and rebuilt it using crayons and toys. And it runs." Silence. Then a whisper. "Oh my God." Thomas glanced toward the garage where Naomi's voice rang out. "Pawpaw, is it okay if I change the red path to green? I think it balances better." He smiled softly. "She doesn't even know what she's done yet." As Meredith's voice cracked through the line, one thing became clear. Naomi Carter had just stepped into a game she didn't even know existed, and she had already made her first move. Meredith Voss had not driven through North St. Louis in over 2 decades. The roads were rougher now, the street signs half faded, and the air held that particular rusted stillness of a neighborhood that had learned to expect little and accept less. Her government-issued sedan felt out of place here, like a clean shoe in a muddy yard. But she kept driving. She had traced Naomi Carter's address from an old employee directory. Thomas Carter was a name she hadn't spoken aloud since the early 90s. Back then, he had been a maintenance technician with a curiosity too dangerous for someone at his pay grade. She, on the other hand, had been a young, idealistic systems engineer with a mind full of algorithms and not enough fear to keep her mouth shut. They had worked together once, briefly, and when her proposal, Till 93A, was pulled from circulation, Thomas was the only one who told her, quietly, that she wasn't wrong, just too early. And now, 34 years later, the phone call he made was still ringing in her ears. She rebuilt it, from scratch, using Legos. Meredith parked beside a peeling garage with a crooked tin sign that read, Carter and Comward Print Repair. She turned off the ignition, closed her eyes for a second, then stepped out. Thomas was waiting in the doorway, arms crossed, same wiry frame, but older now, grayer, sadder. You really came, he said. I had to see it for myself. He didn't smile. He just nodded and stepped aside. When Meredith walked into the shop, she stopped cold. On the far wall, lit by a single fluorescent strip, was Naomi's model. Not just a model. A living diagram. Lines and bricks and handwritten notes curled across wood paneling like veins, overlapping grids and symbols she remembered from her own rejected manuscripts. Except now, they were clearer, smoother, corrected. I never published that iteration, Meredith whispered. No one even saw this version. I left it in a prototype queue. Thomas nodded. The printer found it. She found the printer. Is she here? In the back, she's working on a new variation. They walked slowly through the garage, stepping over parts, wires, scattered pencils, and half-eaten bags of pretzels. Meredith paused at a laminated sheet on the table. It was Naomi's handwriting, written in big looping cursive. Repeat patterns, Brocken stable resonance, infinite loops break and less symmetry, Pronka even. Beneath it another line, maybe odd numbers flip time backward. Meredith sat down. This isn't mimicry, she said. She's not just copying, she's thinking through it like a systems architect. She doesn't know what that means, Thomas said. She doesn't need to. From the back room, a voice called out. Pawpaw, I think the purple wire made the blue one mad. Thomas smiled faintly. That's her. Meredith followed the sound. Naomi was sitting on the floor, surrounded by wires and parts salvaged from old fax machines. A breadboard blinked beside her, pulsing green every 2 seconds. She looked up, wide-eyed, unsure of the stranger in her space. Naomi, Thomas said gently. This is my old friend, Miss Meredith. She used to work on the kind of ideas you're building. Naomi blinked, then offered a small wave. Hi. Did your stuff also not work at first and make sparks? Meredith crouched beside her. All the time, Naomi giggled. Then her face turned serious. I think this model works better if you stop forcing the timeline to behave. Let it loop, but only on prime-numbered nodes. That way it doesn't fight itself. Meredith blinked. That was a sentence she had tried to explain to 5 different postdocs. None of them had gotten it. Naomi, she said carefully, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you know what a Fourier transform is? Naomi frowned. No, is it like a dance move? Meredith smiled. No, it's a math tool to see hidden patterns in data. The thing is, you just used one, with your model. You invented it yourself. Naomi shrugged. It just made sense that way. Later, as Naomi went to wash up, Meredith sat beside Thomas in silence. The weight of what they were witnessing settled between them. I tried to get the model published back then, she said. They said it violated assumptions, that it wasn't computationally viable. They buried it, Thomas added. Then they buried you, Meredith nodded. But she found it, not through academia or peer-reviewed journals or university labs. She found it through instinct. And crayons, Thomas said. Meredith exhaled deeply. She has no idea what this could mean. Not yet, Thomas agreed, but I think you do. I do. The following week, Meredith contacted her old network. Quietly, carefully, no official channels. She sent simulation logs, photos, models, without Naomi's name attached, just to see if anyone would bite. One person did. Dr. Elena Morton, Senior Research Coordinator at the Advanced Propulsion Initiative, a shadow wing of the current Aerospace Research Directive. Her reply was short. If real, this changes everything. Request full walkthrough, discreetly, Meredith told Thomas. You're not going to like this, she warned. Is it dangerous? Only politically. Then we do it. But only if Naomi stays protected. Of course. When Meredith returned to the shop to tell Naomi, she didn't know how to explain it. She sat her down on the stool, cleared her throat, and said, Naomi, someone from a very big place wants to see how your model works. Like a science fair. Kind of, but with grown-ups who use words no one actually understands. Naomi looked skeptical. Will they let me use my stuff? Meredith smiled. Only if you show them what it can do. Thomas stepped forward. You don't have to do this, baby. You're just a kid. You can say no. Naomi looked at both of them. Then she stood, wiped her hands on her jeans, and said, If they're the smart ones, maybe they'll tell me what I made. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat alone in the garage, staring at the wall Naomi had turned into a symphony of color and precision. He thought about legacy, about the decades he'd spent trying to fit in with men who would never see him as equal. He thought about how far Naomi could go, and how quickly the world would try to stop her if she did. The next morning, they cleaned the shop. Meredith ran diagnostics on the simulation files, compressing them into a secure folder she labeled Carter-Voss Protocol. Thomas packed Naomi's Lego model into a carry case, each piece taped in place, labeled with color-coded markers. They left the garage just past noon. What none of them knew, what even Naomi didn't realize, was that across the country, powerful people had already seen the first images, and some of them were not excited. Some of them were afraid, because what Naomi had built wasn't just a model. It was a key, and keys have a way of opening doors that others have worked very hard to keep locked. The room was smaller than Naomi had imagined, not some cavernous lab with blinking lights and robots on wheels, just a plain conference room with beige walls, dusty windows, and one long metal table surrounded by 12 padded chairs. But the people inside it, their eyes carried weight. Some of them were silent, others whispered into tablets. All of them watched her the same way, like she was a mystery no one had asked for. Thomas sat beside her, stiff in a shirt that didn't quite fit anymore. Meredith stood behind her, one hand resting lightly on the back of Naomi's chair. A quiet promise. You're not alone. Across the table sat Dr. Hargrave. His badge read Propulsion Systems Division, but Naomi only needed one glance to know he didn't like her. Not because of what she'd done, but because of what it meant. He tapped his pen against a folder and didn't look up. I see we've traded peer review for elementary school science projects. Someone at the end of the table cleared their throat. This isn't a public briefing, Dr. Hargrave, said Dr. Elena Morton. We're here to verify the claim, that's all. Which claim? Hargrave said, finally glancing at Naomi. That a child with no formal training stumbled into a mathematical model for recursive temporal anchoring, something our team couldn't resolve in 20 years? That claim. Naomi didn't blink. It's not really recursive. It loops, but it doesn't rely on its past values. That's why it doesn't collapse. The room fell quiet. Meredith smiled without smiling. Dr. Morton gestured toward the far wall, where a whiteboard had been wheeled in. Naomi, would you mind walking us through the model? Naomi stood, pulled a clear plastic case from her backpack, and opened it carefully. Inside were the Lego structures she and her grandfather had packed 2 nights before, still intact, still color-coded. She placed them one by one along the table, like setting up pieces in a game no one else knew how to play. This one, she said, pointing to the red cluster, is the original loop from the TIL printout. It doesn't stabilize on its own. That's why the simulation always failed. Hargrave crossed his arms. Because it wasn't supposed to stabilize. It was a thought experiment. No, Naomi said quietly. It was just missing the green piece. She reached into the case and added a single green brick to the top layer of the model. The green piece resets the harmonics every fifth iteration. That way the frequency realigns before the structure unravels. Hargrave snorted. Realigns? Are we doing harmonic analysis now? Did you cover that between cartoons? Thomas tensed, but Naomi stayed calm. She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching. I don't know what it's called, she said, but when you let the loop build up too much energy, it folds. But if you use a spiral instead of a circle, it keeps moving forward without repeating. That's how you get stability. You give the system somewhere to go. Dr. Morton leaned forward. Are you referring to logarithmic spirals? Naomi shrugged. Maybe. I just call it the curl. Another man at the table, older, bald, and quiet until now, cleared his throat. Has anyone run this through a simulation? Meredith handed over a flash drive. These are Naomi's iterations. Run them in sequence. Watch what happens at the 12th cycle. They inserted the drive. The screen at the end of the room blinked to life. Lines and loops danced across the grid. At the 12th cycle, the simulation locked into a pattern and stabilized. Good Lord, the man whispered. It's predictive, Morton said, not just reactive. And adaptive, Meredith added. It accounts for variable input without breaking. That's the holy grail of long-range guidance models. Hargrave didn't speak. He just stared at the board like it had betrayed him. Then he stood. This doesn't prove anything, he said. It's a parlor trick, a pattern with colors and toys. If we're going to pretend this is science, we should at least challenge her. Morton frowned. This isn't an exam. But maybe it should be, he said. Let's see if she understands what she's doing, or just got lucky. Thomas started to stand, but Naomi gently tugged his sleeve. It's okay, she said. I can answer. Hargrave turned to the board and began drawing quickly. A grid appeared, then vectors, then a cluster of notations in dense loops. When he stepped aside, the shape resembled a distorted Mobius loop wrapped in a toroidal frame. If you're so confident in your model, he said, show us how it responds to an unbalanced input vector with a non-fixed topology. You have 2 minutes. The room went still. Thomas whispered, Naomi, you don't have to. She had already picked up the marker. I can't solve it the way you wrote it, she said, stepping closer to the diagram, but I can rewrite it. And she did. She erased 2 sections, redrew the loop into a double helix curve, then layered over it a new set of entry points. This way, she explained, the imbalance flows through the system without pushing it outside the boundary. It dissipates instead of accumulating. Morton's jaw tightened. She's using energy bleed-off to prevent harmonic stacking. She's 10, Hargrave snapped. Naomi set the marker down. I'm also here. He ignored her. Thomas stood up. That's enough. But Naomi raised a hand. No, I want to finish. She turned back to the group. I don't know your words. I haven't read your books. I just look at what breaks and try to fix it. That's all. Hargrave opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, the older man at the end of the table stood. Dr. Hargrave, he said firmly. That's quite enough. Hargrave stepped back, visibly rattled. The older man walked to Naomi, eyes soft. My name is Dr. Bennett. I was part of the original TIL panel in 1987. We buried these models because we couldn't make them stable. You just showed us how to make them breathe. Naomi blinked. Breathe? Bennett smiled. Live. Dr. Morton stood. Naomi, would you be willing to present your work at the Closed System Symposium in Seattle next month? Naomi looked at her grandfather. He nodded slowly. Will there be markers? She asked. Morton laughed. As many as you want. Later that night, back at the print shop, Naomi curled up on the old recliner with her notebook. Thomas brought her hot cocoa and sat nearby without speaking. Pawpaw, she said softly. Yeah? Did I do good? He looked at her, voice thick. You did better than I ever thought possible. She stared at the page in her lap. Then why does it feel like they still don't believe me? Thomas didn't answer right away. Because they don't, he finally said. Not yet. But give them time, baby. Truth takes longer to land in some places. Naomi nodded, then closed her notebook. Upstairs, Meredith was already drafting an internal brief to send to 3 key contacts, including an analyst at the Department of Energy. She knew what was coming, and she knew the world wasn't ready for it, because Naomi Carter hadn't just built a model. She had just placed herself on a collision course with every institution that had decided genius only looked one way, and they had no idea how to handle her. The invitation came in a white envelope with a gold-embossed seal. No stamps, no return address, just a courier who waited at the gate, holding it like it was too fragile to be mailed. Thomas opened it slowly, reading each line twice before he called for Meredith. Symposium of Closed Systems, Seattle, Senior Session, Private Panel. Meredith took the paper from his hands. Her fingers tightened as she read. She's not just presenting, she murmured. They're putting her on the professional track. Naomi, sitting at the kitchen table with a screwdriver and an old radio, didn't look up. Is that bad? Thomas exhaled. It means the grown-ups want you to prove you belong. Naomi set down the screwdriver. I thought I already did. Meredith sat beside her. They're not testing the math this time. They're testing you. That Sunday, Naomi's name was added to a panel that included doctoral candidates, postdoctoral researchers, and aerospace engineers from multiple nations. The session was listed as Nonlinear Temporal Architecture, a Case Analysis. But behind the scenes, there was another name attached to the file, Carter-Voss Protocol, and someone else saw it. Miles away, in a high-rise office with tinted windows, Dr. Jonas Riddell flipped through the briefing packet. He had been in aerospace defense for 24 years, 11 of them inside black-budget projects with no public oversight. He had seen diagrams that predicted orbital debris patterns, weather models for drone corridors, even speculative AI simulations for pattern-of-life tracking. But this was different. He scanned the equations on page 3 and frowned. I've seen this before, he said aloud. The analyst across the room looked up. Sir? Riddell stood, opened a cabinet that hadn't been touched in years, and pulled out a thin folder. The label was faint but legible. Project TIL 93A, decommissioned. He laid Naomi's packet beside it. The overlay matched almost perfectly. Someone had taken a buried model, updated it, and closed the loop. But it wasn't an engineer. It wasn't a lab. It was a child. A child who, according to metadata in the simulation files, had been using a computer 2 generations old. And crayons. Riddell picked up his phone. Secure call to Langley. The line clicked. We've got movement on the old Voss file. Civilian, underage. Presentation scheduled next week. A pause, then a voice on the other end. Do we need containment? Not yet, Riddell said, but we need eyes inside that room, and a narrative ready to go if this leaks. 3 days later, Naomi sat cross-legged on the carpet of a hotel room in Seattle, her Lego model spread across the coffee table. Thomas paced behind her, phone in hand, while Meredith sat by the window, trying to stay calm. Then the knock came. A young woman stood outside the door, holding a visitor's badge. Naomi. Carter? Yes, Naomi said. The woman smiled. I'm Dr. Kim. I'm here to help you prepare. Naomi blinked. For the presentation? Dr. Kim nodded. And for what happens after? Inside the room, Dr. Kim pulled out her tablet. I've reviewed your notes. Your work is incredible, but you need to know, there's been pushback. Naomi's face tightened. From who? Kim hesitated. From people who already knew this model worked, people who signed off on decommissioning it decades ago. Your version, your fix, proves they were wrong. Thomas leaned forward. Are you saying they'll try to stop her? I'm saying they've already started, Kim said. Emails, requests to discredit the proof. Quiet inquiries about your family's history, standard pressure tactics. Naomi looked down. Did I do something wrong? No, Kim said. You did something they didn't think was possible. You changed the equation. That night, Thomas didn't sleep. He stood at the window and watched the city lights blink like distant stars. Meredith typed furiously at her laptop, cataloging every document, every simulation Naomi had produced. Backup copies were sent to multiple servers, one to a journalist she trusted, one to a former colleague in academia, one to a private cybersecurity cloud. Naomi curled in bed, stared at the ceiling. Paw, she whispered. Yeah, baby? If they already knew it worked, why did they hide it? Thomas walked over, sat on the edge of the bed. Because people don't always like being shown they're wrong, especially by someone they weren't expecting. Naomi was quiet for a long time. Then what happens if I do it again? If I show more stuff they said couldn't work? He looked at her, then pulled her close. Then you keep going. Because that's what truth does. It keeps going, no matter who tries to bury it. The next morning, Meredith received an encrypted email from an anonymous address. It contained a scanned copy of a report, dated 1993. Stamped classified, the title read, Carter-Voss Predictive Loop, Instability Resolved in Field Simulation 3, Suppressed due to conflict with pre-existing guidance models. She read it twice, then a third time. They knew, she whispered. They knew 30 years ago, and they killed it anyway. She printed it, sealed it in an envelope, and handed it to Naomi. If anyone tells you this isn't yours, she said, you hand them this. Naomi looked at the seal. What is it? Proof, Meredith said, not just of your model, but of their fear. Naomi nodded slowly. Then she folded the envelope and slid it into her backpack, between her graph paper and her favorite purple pencil. They left the hotel just before sunrise. At the convention center, security was tighter than usual. Naomi had to show her badge twice. Cameras lined the hallway. Reporters waited outside the rope lines, whispering, trying to catch a glimpse of the girl with the impossible math. Inside, the air was thick. The panel had expanded to 16 members, all older, all polished, all professionally unimpressed. But Naomi didn't flinch. She stepped onto the stage with her case, opened it, and began building. Brick by brick, line by line. And when she spoke, she didn't lecture. She told a story about a shape that didn't want to break, about a loop that wanted to keep going forward, about how sometimes you didn't need to know every name for something to see that it worked, about how she'd found a ghost in a broken printer and gave it life again. And for the first time, in a room built to doubt her, Naomi didn't try to prove anything. She just showed them, and they couldn't look away. Naomi Carter didn't know what a legacy was. She didn't know about the white papers being drafted across 3 federal agencies. She didn't know about the urgent defense briefings that mentioned her name without context, only as a variable. And she certainly didn't know that her voice, that small, matter-of-fact voice, had just started a quiet war between the old guard and the truth. All she knew was what she saw on the board in front of her. The model was stable, not just in theory, not just in simulation, live, in motion, demonstrated with her hands in a row of colored bricks, and no one was stopping her. Not anymore. Her voice carried through the auditorium, calm and steady, as she described how periodic stability allowed information to travel through nonlinear systems without collapse. She didn't use terms like quantum architecture or deep space guidance algorithms. She just called it letting the loop breathe. The experts, the ones who had dismissed the theory for decades, said nothing, because they saw it too. They saw the harmony. Halfway through her demonstration, one of the senior engineers on the panel raised a hand. Ms. Carter, he said, can you walk us through the energy recovery mechanism once more? Naomi nodded and turned to the second whiteboard. Sure, she said. If you let the loop build up energy but don't release it fast enough, it breaks like a hose with a knot in it. But if you let the energy move forward into another layer, not backwards, it folds into itself. That way, it doesn't explode. She paused. It breathes out. The room stayed quiet. No one laughed, no one questioned. Even Hargrave, seated at the far end of the table, didn't speak. He had tried. He had failed. Because in front of 800 professionals, Naomi Carter had just done something they couldn't. She made the math make sense, not by simplifying it, but by understanding it. By the end of her session, 3 panelists stood, 2 clapped, 1 cried. Thomas Carter watched from the wings, eyes glassy, heart pounding like it hadn't in 20 years. Meredith sat beside him, hands folded tight, whispering something only she could hear. Naomi looked out at the sea of faces and said quietly, "That's my model." No applause, not yet, but something better. Silence. A kind of silence that meant the room had changed, that the people inside it were thinking new thoughts, dangerous ones. The chair of the symposium stood. "Ms. Carter," she said, "on behalf of the Closed Systems faculty in the Applied Aerospace Division, I would like to formally acknowledge your work as a contributing model to the Adaptive Guidance and Predictive Positioning Initiative." Naomi blinked. "What does that mean?" Meredith stood slowly. "It means your model will be used in real missions, in real systems." Thomas squeezed his granddaughter's hand. "You changed the sky, baby." There were still questions, debates, reviews to come, but the model would not disappear again. It had lived in the dark for 40 years. Now it would see daylight. And Naomi Carter, 10 years old, with no formal training, no degree, no lab, had done what entire research teams with millions in government contracts could not. She had closed the loop. That night, back in the hotel, Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor with her notebook open. She wasn't drawing anymore. She was listening. The world had become louder. The emails, the interview requests, the media interest, even offers, full scholarships, mentorships, internships at places that used words like quantum analytics and space exploration funding. Meredith handled most of it. Thomas just kept refilling Naomi's cocoa and whispering, "One day at a time, baby." Naomi looked up. "Paw? Yeah? Do you think they only believe me now because I proved it in front of them?" Thomas thought for a long moment. "I think they believe you because they saw something they couldn't explain, and because it came from someone they didn't expect." Naomi nodded slowly. "I didn't want to prove anyone wrong. I just wanted to make it work." "And you did," Thomas said. 2 days later, Naomi was invited to speak at a middle school in the same district that had once denied her access to its gifted program. She stood in front of a classroom full of kids who looked like her. Some had never seen someone their age on a national stage. Some had never imagined brilliance could wear sneakers and carry a backpack with stickers on it. Naomi told them what she had done, not how smart she was, but how long it took to listen to an idea no one else believed in. One student raised his hand. "Do you think anyone can make something big, even if they're not, like, rich or famous or whatever?" Naomi smiled. "I think big things happen when you stop waiting for permission." She walked out of the room to applause. Later that week, the Department of Energy issued a quiet white paper referencing a novel predictive navigation model developed by independent research. No names, no credit, but inside the footnotes was a term no one had seen before: the Carter loop. It spread, slowly, quietly. Private aerospace companies started calling. 2 satellite contracts included the model in their guidance systems. A robotics lab in Boston replicated the structure using Python. A defense firm in Virginia requested a patent search. And in a quiet corner of the internet, a retired engineer posted a photo of Naomi's first crayon diagram and wrote, "She saw what we couldn't." By spring, she was on the cover of a STEM magazine. But Naomi didn't care about that. She still lived above the shop with Thomas, still tinkered, still drank cocoa while watching the sky through the dirty window above her desk. And one night, as she sat building a new pattern with a paperclip and a rubber band, Thomas asked her what she wanted to do next. "I want to see if the model works in reverse," she said. "You mean time reversal?" "No, I mean, what if we're reading the whole thing backwards?" Thomas stared at her, then smiled. "Go get your crayons, baby." Because Naomi Carter didn't just solve a problem PhDs had failed to crack for decades. She changed how people saw what was possible. And she did it before she ever realized what she had done. She didn't do it to be famous or to win. She did it because something felt broken, and she couldn't stop until it made sense. She didn't ask for permission. She just saw what no one else did and gave it a name: